just realised. I've just realised actually I won't be able to see people's faces if I screen share the PowerPoints, will I?
No, but you can come in and out, Richard. I come back out and to have a discussion and pop back in.
All right. You might find I'm just talking for like an hour solid, and then I'll come back and everyone will be asleep. Or everyone's gone. I'll have been dropped out of the call and everyone will be gone. And they're like, oh,
that won't happen.
Okay. Let me just make sure I've got the right PowerPoint up. Okay. That's the one I think. Oh, I can actually still see people, but I need to. Oh, can everyone see that?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I can still see people as well. Oh, I've got. Oh, hang on a minute. Can you see each other on my screen? Is it blocking anything on the right? No. Okay. Right. If anything's blocked, just tell me because I think it's only showing you my PowerPoint, though it's not showing you my screen, so I can actually still see everybody. So that's good, I think.
Okay, brilliant.
Right, I'll start. Otherwise, I'll just keep commenting on everything I'm thinking. Okay, so yeah, so today's kind of a very kind of quick overview. I've delivered quite a lot of talks on this type of stuff in the past, and I've probably got like 150 to 200 slides on this. And trying to narrow this down into what can I give you in an hour has been quite difficult, and I have a tendency to continuously just talk and talk and talk. So let's just hope I manage to fit this into an hour. Let me get my phone next to me as well, just so I can keep an eye on the time. Okay, so today we're going to kind of look at what is a cult. Very briefly look at how do people get recruited. Look at Robert J. Lifton's theory of thought reform very briefly, and the basics of helping an ex-cult member. So Robert J. Lifton, by the way, is the guy with the grey hair and the glasses on the right-hand side. And the other two people there, that is Marshall Applewhite from Heaven's Gate, a very well-known cult group who famously took their own life, thinking that their souls would go up to a spaceship as it passed the Earth. And we've also got Jim Jones there from the People's Temple. So it's a very kind of brief overview because this is such a complex subject. Normally when I'm delivering training, I talk about like lots of different things like how language is used, how cult groups impact child development, how people escape, some of the processes of trying to help someone escape, all that stuff. So it's really quite a quick overview today. So who am I? I'm a counsellor, and during my counselling training, I ended up accidentally recruited into a cult. And when I left, I did teacher training and went on to do a master's in the psychology of controlling behaviour. My master's dissertation was comparing how language was used in two Bible-based cult groups with a multi-level marketing company, and how it was used to financially exploit people and control people and entrap them. So I'm currently a lecturer in counselling at York College, and that's where I am at the moment, in York. And I'm in private practice as a counsellor. So my practice is split into three kind of sections, if you like. I counsel ex-cult members. Most of my clients have been had a run-in with the cult, or they've just left the cult, or they grew up in a cult. However, the cult has impacted them. They usually, they come to me. I also give advice and guidance for friends and family of cult members. So I often coach people how to talk to the family members who are currently in cults, help them to know what the best course of action is to help them escape, and just offer support, really. Sometimes people hire me to actually teach them some of the psychology to help them decide how to move forward and what to do. So I've been doing this counselling practice for about 2 years. Also education, which of course is what I'm doing now. So yeah, that's who I am. I was in a cult group roughly sort of from December 2014 to March 2017, and here are some photographs of me in said cult. So it was a very charismatic, lively church, labeled as a church. group, a very controlling group, and I got involved in it because I was looking for a counselling placement, funnily enough. I went to get to this charity and I thought, oh, this looks really great. They didn't take counsellors, but they said, would you like to volunteer for us? So I started volunteering for them. And over time, I ended up attending their meetings, and they slowly kind of groomed me and tried to take control over my life. So basically, the church group was running the charity, but then I was filtered into the church group. At the most controlling point, I was living with them, I was working for them, and I was attending their meetings twice a week. So basically, my story kind of started kind of fairly gentle. I had warning signs that there was something not right about the group. They were very fixated on money. They taught what is commonly known to be the prosperity gospel, which means if you give us money, God will bless you. And it gets you to a state of mind where you basically don't even analyze how much money you're giving anymore. You just give and give and give. And they taught you almost have to give until you were afraid. And then they taught you to repress that fear because you need to have faith. And so you just give and give and give. And of course, while that's going on, the leadership, all at the top, are making a lot of money and living very luxurious lives like celebrities. And when the leader left recently, we saw his house for sale online. It was £500,000. It had a hot tub in it. Then we realized he had other houses for sale. And also we saw Instagram posts where they were buying holidays to New York for the other leaders, for other leaders. And while all that was going on, us at the bottom of the pile were giving loads and loads and loads of money. I got out of it because I started a relationship with someone in the group. And when I did, I was called into a meeting, and they said that you need to learn to submit and obey to the leadership and do exactly what you're told. And all this was wrapped up in lots of love bombing. You're amazing. You're so great. It's so great to have you here. But subtly, what they were trying to do is build up more and more control over my life, really. From the very beginning, lots of ground rules were set down. I wasn't allowed to kiss my partner. I wasn't allowed to be alone, sleep over at a house, even in the separate bedrooms. I wasn't, I had to go to the leadership if I ever wanted to propose to her, so they could tell me how to propose. I wasn't allowed to choose how to propose to her. And they basically tightened the control on it from the moment I got with her, until eventually, inevitably, it crumbled. And my girlfriend was in another plant from this cult group in a different city, kind of went off the radar, disappeared. I tried to contact her. I was ordered never to speak to her again. I wasn't allowed to be with her. I wasn't allowed to talk about her. And she effectively just dropped off the radar. I started sending her a bunch of letters to find out what was going on. And we received a very mysterious letter back from her, which was clearly not written by her. It had someone else's handwriting on the envelope. It was typed up. It had the church's stamp mark on the front. So it was sent not in a private post box. It was sent through the church, saying that I am fully accountable to the leadership and you need to be accountable to the leadership. Basically telling me she never wanted to see me again, but I had no evidence that it was from her. And the church gaslighted me to think I was imagining it, that she wasn't being controlled. They subtly started taking responsibility from my job, in constructive dismissal. They all stopped talking to me. I would turn up at the meetings. No one would even engage with me or talk to me. And I was effectively what I've recently come to kind of, well, the terminology I use for that now with clients is internal shunning. So I was effectively internally shunned. So people just stopped talking to me, which is a common way that cults punish people who don't kind of toe the line and do what they're told. So eventually I had a breakdown because of the way I was treated, and because of what happened, because they tried to convince me I was imagining everything, and along with lots of evidence that something was seriously wrong, that the leaders were controlling my ex-partner, and that something really wasn't right, mixing in with the fact that I was being convinced it was I was imagining it, but just made me really ill, until I just had the breakdown. I went off sick and eventually left and I ended up being very psychologically unwell because of all the grooming and manipulation, and later on realised because of the teachings I'd been listening to for the last 3 years, because that did a lot of damage to me and I didn't even notice at the time what was going on. So I left with nothing. I had to move back home with my parents. I had nowhere to live. I had no job. I was too ill to work. They literally dismantled my entire life. So that was a very quick overview of my cult story. I'm sorry that's very quick because it takes about 2 hours to tell in its entirety. But some very quick things from this photograph. Top left there is one of the meetings. Smoke machines, lights, loud music. You feel amazing there. It feels like the most exciting thing ever. And that's actually part of the control because you actually think it's good when you're in it and you don't realize how bad it is until you start getting further and further in. Bottom left image is a quote from the cult leader. Don't fight the season, reap the harvest, which is classically vague and could mean 1,000 different things. The reason why I'm posting that on there is because we had a gala dinner ball thing celebrating the charity, and this was given to us as a present from the leaders. So just to illustrate the arrogance of them, we all got a gift of a quote from the leader when we went to one of the celebration dinners. And that's why that photograph's in, because it just really demonstrates the arrogance of them. And that's me on the right. My life is in absolute ruins there, absolute ruins. So I'm really sick with anxiety, not out for days. And I wanted to put that on there to really illustrate how much a person can repress what's going on when you're in a cult, and how fake that image, the pseudo personality can come across. So that image on the right is an exact example of the pseudo personality, which I'm going to mention later on. That fake cult personality that happens when people are really repressing when people become voiceless, when they're repressing what they want and what they need and things like that. So, whoa, that was 10 minutes, and that's one slide out of 25. Let's go. So, cult. The problem with cult, the word cult, is that some people don't like using it because of the negative connotations, because some people think cults are a bit wacky, and they only associate that word with the big famous cults, Jonestown, Heaven's Gate, groups like Scientology, who are often considered to be a cult by various people. And the problem is some people think that also makes people think that they're rare and also really wacky and out there. So some people don't like to use that term cult. They use phrases like high demand group or totalitarian group or coercive control, or spiritual abuse is another one. But I tend to use it because it's just a word that I fell into and I don't mind using. So there isn't a set definition of it. There isn't a set definition of the term cult. There isn't like one definition. People interpret it in lots of different ways, but the definition you can see there on the screen is the one that I use. It's the one on my website. So the group or movement that has excessive or great devotion, dedication to some person, and they specifically employ unethically manipulative techniques of persuasion and control. So it's all about advancing the goals of the group leaders, and that is to the actual or possible detriment to the members. So it's all about the leader. It's about the leader getting what they want. The leader's needs being met, and it's often causing harm to the people who are members of the group. And they're often unethical, deceptive, controlling, and use unethical manipulation techniques. So that's the kind of definition I use when I talk about cults. You might be surprised to know that cults are mentioned in the DSM-5. Not many people realise this, but it's other specified dissociative disorder. And that's an identity disturbance due to prolonged and intense coercive persuasion. So individuals who have been subjected to intense coercive persuasion. So for example, it says brainwashing, thought reform, indoctrination, and it mentions being captive, tortured, or long-term political imprisonment, or recruited by sects or cults. So the term cult is actually used in the DSM-5. So these people may present with prolonged changes in or conscious questioning of identity. And identity is key here, because what we're really talking about is the cult leaders and the cults mold someone into the identity they want them to have. The leaders are basically reshaping somebody's identity. So often when people have been in cults, they have a cult identity and a real identity. And you'll often find that people in cults are very, very similar to each other because they've all adopted that cult identity, because the leaders have basically molded them into that. And obviously that causes difficult mental health problems, and people repressing the real version of them, repressing their real wants and desires because of the intense pressures that come from being in a cult group. So when I deliver more in-depth training, I talk more about that, the persuasion techniques that go on and why people are persuaded and why people go along with things. But the key thing is that the damage is identity related, and people are often very disconnected with the feelings because they've had to repress them to survive in the cult environment. So I just noticed before Kimberly's got that top quote's a little bit old, but not many people are researching cult psychology, so it's actually quite difficult sometimes to get more up-to-date cult quotes. But the key thing is not all cult groups harm people all of the time. You'll get people who've been into them and come back out, and not much harm has been done to them. They'll have periods of time where it's more harmful and periods of time where it's less harmful. So it isn't like a black and white thing. Oh, if you've been in a cult, you'll be this, this, and this. People have lots of different experiences, and it depends on how long they've been in for, how intensely they've been controlled in that time, how high up they got, or where were they in the group. There are lots of different factors that can impact on how much harm is done to someone in the group and the type of cult as well. So people don't actually join cults. They join things they think will be interesting or will help them. For example, now often multi-level marketing companies are talked about in terms of being cult-like. And often people get involved in that because they just want to make a living and they're trying to, it appeals to them to have their own business. But they don't realize what it is from the outside often. And cults will often target people. So often it might not even be that they've joined. Most of the time they're actually recruited, they're targeted, and they'll look for someone's needs, their vulnerabilities, and they will say, oh, we can fulfill that. Oh, you're lonely, or you need a community, or you're new to the city, come along to this meeting. There's, you'll meet lots of new people, or, oh, you need help with this, or we can help you with that. And that's often how they end up getting involved, because they're at a vulnerable time and the cult will try and meet those needs. Everyone, it's a myth, right, that only vulnerable people join cults. It's just that certain people have certain vulnerabilities, and cults know how to spot those. Cult groups know how to spot those. But everyone is susceptible. For the most part, cults want to use people, so they want people who have got money, or they're intelligent, or they've got qualifications or training. They want people that they can use. So those are the people often the ones who are targeted. So I'll keep having to move the box over to the side because I can't see what. So these notes, by the way, I apologise. There's a lot of writing on the slides, but this is to help me a bit because I don't read from notes. So, what a cult is like from the outside isn't what it's like on the inside. On the outside, it's often what's really common is they will say, we're doing all this great work in the community, we're doing this, and they try and get a really good reputation. They'll target, key members, politicians, they'll target celebrities, they'll target anyone who can make them look good. They'll have charities, but often the charities are quite shoddily run, are quite corrupt. And it's all about giving them a good image. So they'll train members on how to talk to visitors to promote their image. But in other areas, there'll often be abusive behaviour going on. So from the outside, they're often trying to present a good image. And that's part of the reason I think probably why some people aren't believed when they leave, because from the outside it looks so great. And I know my group from the outside looked like they were doing great work. I know from being on the inside it was completely corrupt, and that money wasn't being spent where they said it was being spent, and people were being groomed into the cult who were very vulnerable, who the charity was supporting. So let me move my box. So as I've mentioned, it's very difficult for people on the outside to believe what's actually going on the inside. It's the outer circles that are visible to the public, and the ones on the inside are the ones that are the most controlled and have little interaction with the outside. So for people to be controlled, the key thing is in isolation. You isolate them from outside voices, from information. You control that information, and they often live in a bubble effectively when they're in so phone's just buzzing all over the place. So there's a diagram that illustrates it quite well. So the deeper you go into the center of the system, the more distant from reality you become as you enter the fiction of the closed and secretive totalitarian world. So we've got here, this is a photograph from Alex Stein's book, Terror, Love and Brainwashing, but I've put 3 photographs over the top. So this is from NXIVM. So if you've seen The Vow or Seduced, that's about this cult group, and he's been on trial over the last year, Keith Raniere. And famously, he had a little group of women high up who he was branding, and he told them that it was a sacred symbol of some kind when it was actually his initials. So he was branding the women, but no one below that knew what was going on. So people at the bottom had a very different experience than the ones who were higher up. So you tend to find that as you go higher up the hierarchy towards the leader, it gets less, it's more out of touch with reality. So often the people at the bottom are being exploited, especially financially, and the people at the top are making a lot of money and having, living in their own fantasy world, basically controlling people. So what slide are we on? I have no idea. Let me just check what slide we're on. 10. Okay, that's okay. Okay. So Robert J. Lifton's thought reform model. So this isn't the normal model I would teach on when giving talks on cult psychology, but it's a really important model to know about, because it's often the foundation of how people understand thought reform. So lots of later models are built upon what Robert J. Lifton wrote about in his book Thought Reform and the Psychology of Totalism. So this comes from studying brainwashing in China in the 1950s and 60s. But this was his model of how people get controlled. Now, the term, people use lots of different terms for this. So thought reform, brainwashing, mind control, coercive control, to describe some of the behavior, but you tend to find the term brainwashing is really on the extreme end of the spectrum, where there might have been like torture and imprisonment and more severe treatment. So you tend to find that thought reform is not quite as extreme as brainwashing. And some of theories wrestle with the fact that, people still have choices, but what's going on as part of the control is the choices are limited. So when I was doing my master's dissertation, one of the ways that, because it was one of the Bible-based cults I analysed was the group I was in, and what they would do in their teachings is they would say they would limit choices. So you make it logical and rational for you to choose the choice they want you to choose. So they don't say, oh, there's 10 different things you can do. You either do this and this. So when it came to like giving money, they would say, for example, in their teachings, they would say, for example, don't be stingy. Don't be like people who don't be outside in the cold, like those cold, stingy people. Give and tithe your money and be part of the community. And so basically there's 2 choices. You either give loads of money and be part of the community and receive rewards, or you're cold and you're stingy and you're outside in the cold, and there's 2 extremes, and you could only be those 2 extremes. And that's how often some of the control happens. They will teach you that there's only these 2 options. It's called bounded choice. And that allows for the fact that we still are able to make choices. When people are being controlled, they don't become like mindless robots, but it's quite understandable that they make the choices they do because the choices are so limited. Now, so this is Lifton's model of thought reform. I normally teach the BITE model of mind control, which is almost like CBT used for the power of evil, I sometimes say, because it plants irrational thoughts, it controls information, it impacts people's emotions, and it relies on cognitive dissonance to change people. But a lot of those later theories are built on Lifton, and often if you read books about domestic abuse, Lifton's name comes up. You might hear his name come up in human trafficking, modern slavery psychology and things like that, because it's very similar psychology. It crosses over. There's, this isn't a separate subject to domestic abuse and things like that, because often in cult groups, domestic abuse is quite common because of the damage of the cult's teachings and the damage that being in a cult causes. So milieu control is control of information and communication within the environment, so ultimately within the individual, resulting in a significant degree of isolation from society at large. So for someone to be controlled, they have to be isolated. Isolation is the key. Like normally in day-to-day life, we mix with people, lots of different ideas, we interact with lots of different information, TV shows, we're getting like about different types of information coming in, and we're able to like analyze that and balance it. Except in cult groups, that information is often controlled and communication is often controlled. So that is a key to actually how someone that ends up effectively having their mind controlled, because I don't think we realize how fragile our minds are. And what's going on now, especially with the lockdown, is because people aren't mixing with people as much, because they're spending a lot of time on their own. We've got a form at the moment of milieu control, especially with social media fueling certain conspiracy theories and things like that. And that's probably part of the reason why people are getting involved in QAnon. And I'm getting quite a few calls from people who are concerned about people who've been stuck in the house all the time, going down the rabbit hole of researching things. And part of that is because actually control and information and communication has been controlled, because we can't mix with people the same, we can't go to work the same. And you're seeing that a little bit now, actually. Certain cult groups will have technology where it's controlled by the cult. So they have tracking software on it and they monitor everything you Google. You're not allowed to have access to technology. You're not allowed to watch certain television shows. You're not allowed to communicate with ex-members, because obviously the ex-members are going to say negative things about the cult. And everything will be controlled like that. And and it's quite commonplace. So they try and keep one of the ways they control it, try and keep all the cult people spending time with each other all the time and not mixing with certain information. So mystical manipulation is manipulation of experiences that appear spontaneous, but in fact were planned and orchestrated by the group, its leaders, or in order to demonstrate the divine authority or spiritual advancement of some special gift or talent. Then allow the leaders to interpret events, scripture, and experiences as he or she wishes. So when I was in my group, they would prophesy over you, which was like a cold reading, psychic type thing. And they tell you, but what they do is they tell you all the things that you want to hear, so you feel really good afterwards. And and that's part of the control as well. And you think, when I was in my group, I thought the leaders were prophets. I thought they had some special gift from God. And in other cult groups, you might get fake miracles. You might get conversations about this is a sign that this is right, and that's actually just a coincidence, or it was staged, or it was set up. So that's often a key part in thought reform as well, that there's this mystical manipulation, and a lot of it will often make the leader look even more powerful, so they're even more persuasive, and they seem like they've got these special gifts. And again, that's part of the control, because they seem then to have more authority. So the worldview is the world is viewed as black and white, and the members are constantly exhorted to conform to the ideology of the group, strive for perfection. The induction of guilt or shame is a powerful control device used here. Guilt and shame is a heavy control mechanism. Guilt makes people more compliant. So if you make people think that there's something wrong with them, they'll try harder and harder and harder. One of the ways people get controlled in cults is, and this is really important from a therapeutic point of view, is the cult will always make the individual think it's their fault, to divert attention away from the cult, well, really from the leader, because the leader can't take criticism because of their insecurities. So the individual often come out thinking there's something wrong with them. They failed, they weren't spiritual enough, they betrayed God, or there's something wrong with them, God's punishing them, or if it's an MLM, I didn't work hard enough, I'm not good enough, I didn't commit enough. and they're often because of the teachings of the group. Oh, there's something wrong. You know, you've got a rebellious spirit is the common thing that I hear. You know, you've got a spirit of fear. You lack commitment. So often, as part of the control mechanisms, everything's put back onto the person. So they when they leave, they still think it's their fault. They think everything's their fault, and that's part of the reason why they don't speak out. Often because they're ashamed and embarrassed. But that's part of the control. So when they're in it, they can be controlled because they keep thinking it's them that's the problem, because they don't think it's the group, because it's never the group's problem. It's never the teachings of the group. It's never the leaders, because of that environment control, that's all the information they're hearing, the milieu control, the cult is controlling all of the information. So confession, so sin is defined by the group. So the group says what's right and wrong, and you need to confess that to a personal mentor or publicly to the group. There's no confidentiality, and members' sins, attitudes, and faults are discussed and exploited by the leaders. You know, and it's very common for cult groups to have counsellors who will report back to the leaders, counsellors who are sympathetic to the cult. You pretty much can't trust anyone, and that damage psychologically, that did me a lot of damage when I was in my group, because I was looking around and I needed someone to talk to, and I couldn't trust anyone, so I just pushed it down and pushed it down and pushed it down. And that is how that fake, smiley, happy personality begins to come across, because what was really going on is I couldn't trust anybody, and that was causing a lot of the damage. But if you get people to confess all the time as well, they start believing that they're never good enough, and that then becomes part of the control as well. So sacred science, the group's doctrine or ideology, is considered to be the ultimate truth. Beyond all question and dispute, truth is not to be found outside of the group. The leader, as a spokesperson for God or for all humanity, is likewise above criticism. Hard for people to challenge things if they think it's from God. So often God is used as a way to control, because they'll use like Bible scriptures or scriptures of another religious text, and it's very hard to go against that, because you're almost going against a perfect being, and of course that can be used as a control technique, which is really common as well. And often the leader becomes in a godlike character, because of the mystical manipulation, because the leader's done these prophecies or has got this mythical backstory, or in the case of like Keith Raniere, who I mentioned before, is one that's supposed to be one of the most intelligent people in the world, and they have this myth, this myth about them where they're above everybody else, or they've achieved some sense of enlightenment, and it's very hard to challenge that, and that becomes like a sacred science. Then it's like challenging God. Or someone's very successful, or they've got certain qualifications, it's quite hard. So loading a language, so the group interprets and uses words and phrases in new ways, so often that the outside world does not understand. This jargon consists of thought-terminating cliches, which serve to alter the members' thought processes to conform to the group's way of thinking. So there's lots of emotive language. Emotions play a key part in thought form, because if you can get people to feel certain emotions, they're less likely to critically think about things. If you can get them to feel good, or of course, if you can get them to feel negative emotions, then that'll have an impact on the thoughts because of cognitive dissonance. And so loaded language, you'll hear, when I was in my group, you can hear like robotic cliched phrases that everyone seems to say, and when you're around it can be quite eerie. So my group would say phrases like, oh, the leadership are wise, I allow them to speak into my world. And I heard that phrase all the time, but it's almost like it says so much, it becomes a cliche, so no one ever really questions it. They're just saying these phrases. Or that we trust the leadership, we have to learn to submit to the leadership. But from the outside, it sounds really odd. But they're so used to saying it, they don't even realize it's part of the control. So this like jargon, these cliches, these emotionally charged words and phrases are all part of that control as well. And all cults have their own language and terminology, which is quite important to know if you're counselling someone, because they might still be using that terminology in the counselling room. And some of it can be really strange or eerie. And to them, it's a very normal way of speaking. But you can explore that with people. And obviously this framework can be used in the counselling room as well. So the final two, sorry, just checking the time. Right. Doctrine over the person. So the member's personal experiences are subordinated to the sacred science and any contrary experiences must be denied and reinterpreted to fit the ideology of the group. So people's pasts are often changed, things are often distorted because if it doesn't fit with the group's ideology. So, you know, people will reinvent their own past and rethink their own past, thinking that they were far worse than they actually were. Because, oh, before I found this group, my life was terrible, and you know, but because the group can't acknowledge that they were happy before they were in it, so the doctrine overtakes the personal experiences, and any experiences that don't fit that will be denied, ignored, or reframed and reinterpreted to fit the ideology of the group. And fine. I mean, sorry, this is a very quick overview. I apologise. It's just to give you a bit of a flavour, if you like. Dispensing of the existence, the group has the prerogative to decide who has the right to exist and who does not. This is usually not literal, but means that those in the outside world are not saved. They are unenlightened, unconscious, and they must be converted to the group's ideology. If they do not join the group or are critical of the group, then they must be rejected by the members. Thus, the outside world loses all credibility. In conjunction, should any member leave the group, he or she must be rejected also. This again links in with the milieu control and information control as well. If there's nothing for the outside world to offer you, then you're more likely to stay. And they don't want you talking to ex-members because they'll tell you the truth and they'll try to tell you what's wrong with it. And that's part of it. That's part of the control, you know. These people out there, they're unenlightened. They don't understand what we do as a group. They don't understand why we do this. You know, they will never get why we have to do these things. It's because we want to be pure, because we're different, and it becomes a very us and them thing. So even when they are around these people, they will less likely to engage if they're even allowed to be, and they're less tempted to go and mix with these sinners or people who are unenlightened or So if they can't convert them, then they will cut off altogether. So, like I've mentioned before, and it's very important for counsellors to know, cults attack a person's individual personality. You know, it's just someone's individual personality. Of course, we've got lots of different temperaments and interests and talents and abilities. Everyone is totally different, but they ignore difference and they're focused on a goal or vision to which members must conform. So anything in a person that gets in the way, or that they can't control, or they'll kind of like teach them to repress it and try and get them to conform. That's a lot of writing. So what they do then, they'll talk about this new identity, and they'll use positive reinforcement to push the traits they want, and guilt and shame to get rid of the traits they don't want. So for me, some of this stuff scrambled my head that much that I got rid of all my possessions. I thought some of my possessions were evil. I'm only now reclaiming some of that back, but I still feel like worried about, I don't know. The big one for me recently has been I watched Ghostbusters 2 the other day. I haven't watched that for years because I was frightened demons were going to come into me from watching it. But not unconsciously, some words like, oh, I can't watch this because it's got ghosts in it, and still there's that fear that's been implanted in me. But in my group, everyone dressed the same, they spoke the same. You've got it was like a hipster cult in a lot of ways. But if you dress differently, there'd be comments about how you dressed, until you just end up dressing the same as them and you start acting the same as them. And I consider my experience to be not as severe as some of the people I counsel and ever interacted with, but the amount of damage that does, you start just losing your sense of self and who you are. But then you get rewarded by the cult. You're saved, you're born again, you're empowered, enlightened, transformed. And that then is like sorry, I'm just moving the slide so I can see what the bottom is. That new social identity is like the cult pseudo personality, and that will have all the cult language, and it's almost like a mask, and it can be quite eerie. But what I found in my group is they've all got the same interests, they watch the same TV shows because of some of this coercive control that's going on. But again, I consider my group to be fairly mild on some of these, but severe in other areas. But so the person will end up with a totalistic identity. So basically, as people, we're very reliant on there's lots of aspects that make us who we are. So, you know, the roles, we're mother, daughter, son, father, we're a footballer, we're a teacher, we're a parent, we're a human, all these things make up in a healthy way who somebody is. And if we are part of a group, so for example, if we went to a church or we're part of a therapy group, that would be one aspect of many things that we are. But what happens in the cult is that aspect will grow and grow and grow, and all the others get smaller and smaller and smaller. And that's when someone ends up with a totalistic identity. So that the name of that theory is totalistic identity theory. So, and that is when it starts damaging your mental health, because the self-care goes out the window. With people are repressing the voices, they're missing out on hobbies and interests they used to have. The health is suffering, relationships are suffering. You know, marriages are often damaged in cult groups because the cult leader and the cult's mission is more important than the person's partner. So that shrinks down, but the cult gets bigger. That's, you know, part of what is going on, part of that control. People in cults often don't have hobbies, or have very few hobbies if they're allowed any, or you know, they miss out on a lot of things in life. And you know, especially children miss out on a lot of important experiences, and they often stunted in their development because of being in cult groups if they've grown up in them. So at this point, I was supposed to mention this before and I forgot. So you can get people who are born into cults, and you tend to call them second or multi-generation members, so they've grown up in it. And there's people who join them later on, so the first generation members. That's important because it means that when they go into the cult, the first gen members, they've already established, they've got a sense of self, more or less. They've established a bit of an identity, and then that's been warped and changed. But when someone is born into it, their whole identity is built up in the cult. They never got a chance to experience things outside of the cult group. So that those things are quite important to know if you're trying to help someone, because for those who are second or multi-generation, they don't know who they are, or they haven't had those experiences. And even though most people don't entirely know who they are, but they're still the first gen ones, they've still got something to draw upon. They still had a life before the cult, but the second and multi-generation ones don't. So they often struggle. So when it's really important to kind of build that. Who are you? What do you enjoy? What things are important to you? What are your values? Because they haven't had much of that before. So when someone leaves a cult, it's dominated so much of their life and identity. It can be hard to step back, and people are left with a huge void. Cults will make it that it costs somebody everything to leave: the family, the job, the well-being. That they set it all up so that everyone will often shun you. If you're part of a family, the family won't speak to you again. Not only that, if you try to contact them, the cult will punish the family. So people try and protect their own families. So they won't contact them. They will. If you've been working for them, you'll lose your job. They'll make it. And they'll say publicly, "Oh, anyone can leave. Anyone's allowed to leave." But yeah, well, they'll make it hell for people to leave, and people will be left with guilt and shame, and all these cult toxic beliefs that have come from them, which were when they were in it, were designed to keep them in it. So now they're left. They can be facing all sorts of difficulties and struggles. So. If you remember from earlier on, I was saying that the whole life is this. It's dominated the whole identity, and it's like a trauma. All of a sudden, your whole identity, there's a huge gap when you're not in it anymore. So that people's lives, all the friendship circles are and that's the other thing as well. People mourn the friendships because they're not what they thought they were. So they come out, they've got no basis for understanding. So when they come out, they often feel like an alien because no one gets what's happened to them. They struggle to connect with people. They're still using the cult language. And some of the stories are that bad that they don't even know how to function or get a job or even do basic things like go shopping and things because they've never had to do it on the more severe end of the spectrum. They fear of evil spirits taking over one's life. All the things that the cult taught them would happen to them when they leave, they were frightened of. Oh, you'll be punished by God. you're not under protection of the group. So in my group, they did actually teach that, while you're in part of this, you're protected, while you're in this group, and all of those thoughts and things can come up. There's a fear of kind of going mad, confusion about right and wrong, because obviously the cult has their own rules about things and right and wrong. Sexual conflicts. Often some of the groups where the leader is sleeping with one of the person's partners, or on the more severe end, it's turned into modern slavery, it's sex trafficking, horrendous guilt, because they think it's them. The loss of a sense of loss, grief, all the things that you lose, your community. Yeah, I've said that already. And yeah, so I've said most of that. So huge racks of things from life skills to emotional and mental health struggles to having no community. The cost for people could be huge. And for me, fortunately, I still had people outside, and I can, even though they almost drove me to suicide, I actually consider myself to be quite fortunate, because some of the stories I hear are unreal. So where are we now? Just check time. Okay, so yeah, so when people come out, you've got that. Sorry, I've got this banner. I keep moving around the screen. Loss of family, friendship, sense of purpose. They've been part of this group where they're saying, we're going to change the world. This really matters. This is so important. It's go, go, go. Come to 4 meetings a week. Attend this seminar. We'll go on this conference. You're studying things all day. You get out there on the streets and try and recruit people and make money. And it's go all the time. And all of a sudden, nothing. And they don't know what to do with that. And that can kind of manifest itself in turning into like problems with perfectionism and struggles where they've got to be involved in something. They've got to keep going because that's what they're used to. They're just used to living that, because everything is about the cult. Everything is full on all the time. Loss of hopes for the future. There's a sense where they thought things were going to be a certain way in the cult and life was going to be a certain way, and all of a sudden that's not possible anymore. Structure. Some people find it very difficult to cope with the fact that because everything was controlled, all of a sudden they could just do what they want, and that's very difficult to come to terms with for some people. And a sense of loss of identity as well, because remember that cult, that was their identity. They were perhaps out on the streets every week doing certain things, trying to recruit people. They were going to these huge long meetings, and all of a sudden that's not there anymore. So when someone does leave, the backlash follows them as well, unfortunately. So families are ordered not to speak to them again. Sometimes groups will publish private information about the ex-member or slander the ex-member. They'll stalk them or harass them. I've had people having to contact the police because the cults won't leave them alone. They might even take legal action against them. Cults often will threaten with legal action, and because they've been taking everybody's money, they've got the money to take people to court if they want to. If they're employed, they can't. That was one of my struggles. Part of the reason why I struggled to leave, because I couldn't get any reference. They wanted employment. So yeah, there can often be a huge backlash when someone leaves, and they've got to cope with that while they're also trying to recover. So often they'll get bombarded with text messages, they'll get phone calls, they'll use guilt and shame, and they'll use family members to try and get them back in. And then if they start speaking out against them, they usually get declared, different, like you get here, different language, suppressive, apostate, or whatever. All the members are banned from speaking to them, and then and they'll be slandered as well. So in the groups, nobody listens to them. So for a counsellor, then it's important that people counselling people who've been cultists, they have counsellors of an understanding of the cults and the psychological processes at work, in which are much more complex than I give you today. So this was just a taste. It's been a very quick overview. I've hit with so much information in such a short period of time. So it's very important as well. I have found, and based on research as well, that they've got the handouts and the psychoeducation to help them understand. Because remember, they think it's them. They think they're the problem. And all of a sudden, when they read how some of these coercive control processes work, they realize that actually it's the group, and it's giving them that validation and that permission to say, oh, it's not me. this is what these groups do. This is like a thing. And once they realize, because they often what they think it's just their group, like they're the only ones, because they've been made to feel like it's them, like they're the only ones, they're isolated. And when they realize, oh, this happens in most of these groups, and they start seeing that pattern, they suddenly realize, oh, this is a thing that happens to everybody. Lots of people can be controlled in lots of different ways, and it really helps them and gives them that validation. And so sometimes what I do as well is I recommend documentaries on cults to help them, because what happens is they watch them and they're like, oh, I can't believe it, my cult did this, and this is a totally different group. It's nothing to do with my group. So all that, oh, we're a special group, we're unique, we're the elite, we're going to change the world. There isn't another group like us. All of a sudden, it isn't so special anymore, and they realize that actually the leader is a liar, basically, and you unmask it, you take away its power by helping them understand, and obviously in understanding how it's impacted their mind as well. So I can't read that. So with or without therapy, ex-cult members at risk of remaining in psychological and relational limbo for years. But if they can understand how cults operate to control the members' thinking and behavior, they have the opportunity to tell their personal story within a relational psychoeducational therapy that can offer them tools to understand their experience, manage their emotions, and process their trauma and loss. There is a real hope for recovery of the autonomous self and growth. So actually, people can sometimes, even if they don't get the right support, if they're not getting the right kind of therapy, they're not doing that kind of psychoeducational element, they can stay stuck in that. But there is hope for them. Time. I think we might just finish on time here. Can't believe I fit in. So some things I've learned while I've been doing this, and from being a client, because I've been in counselling 5 times from my experience, and I'm still working through it with a counsellor. So you're recognizing, counsellors need to recognize the pseudo identity, that cult identity, because you can actually be communicating with that pseudo identity and not really actually connecting with their real self. So that's really important to recognize that there's a cult identity there. And it's like a self-concept thing, and then the core self, the organismic self, if you like, it's what's the real them. The other thing is, so there's a problem, and I've heard this from clients and friends, that counsellors have a tendency to assume that they got involved with a cult because of some childhood vulnerability, or they're vulnerable, there's something wrong with them. And what they can do is end up dismantling that, and it's like kicking the legs from under them, because you need someone's previous experience to help them to unpack the cult experience. And I've heard from clients say to me, I was getting really annoyed in my counsellor because they kept wanting to go back into my childhood, and I came to talk about the cult. And it's like, you need the older experiences to help them work out their identity before the cult. And not only that, if somebody's been in a cult, their self-esteem will be very low. There'll be lots of guilt and shame, and you really don't want to start picking around in all the negative stuff as well, or anything else that's happened to them. So the first stage is very cult orientated, and unpacking what the cult was and things like that. So what I've written there is, and therefore dismantling the original self and leaving the client with nothing to lean on when trying to unpick the cult programming, making the assumption the client got involved in the group because of their weakness. So rather than what happened to the cult, what's wrong with you, if that makes sense. So that's going back to myths about cult recruitment as well, that it's only kind of like weak, fragile people who are gullible who get involved in them, and it's not true. There you go. Assuming a person joined because of some vulnerability, or even victim blaming. What is wrong with you that made you susceptible to this is not helpful at all. A person might come to a place where they're thinking about their own vulnerabilities, but they go there naturally when they're ready. Codependency is often a phrase that's not so helpful as well, because I think it's got negative connotations, and the cult, with that environment controlling the information, you can make someone dependent subtly by grooming and controlling and manipulating. And we all our minds are all quite fragile in a lot of ways, and in certain environments they do start to change without, even no matter how strong-minded we think we are. Given certain environments, we will start changing. So focusing on negative and forgetting to build up the self and the new identity. So you're dismantling this cult identity, but who are they? How do you build them back up? How do you help them think about what's important to them, what their values are? And that's also a really important part of the process as well, because if you start dismantling everything, what have they got left? So that's really important as well. And the psychoeducation is quite important. Looking at lifting, looking at theories of persuasion, helping someone understand what happened to them. You see, from experience, and I've experienced this, and he has talked about in one of the books, that if it's just person-centered, you're reflecting back their own confusion at them, and there's nothing to pin anything on. So the psychoeducational is really important, because it's like as having been there, it's like you're trying to hold on to smoke all the time. When I left, I couldn't tell what was real or not. I couldn't grasp onto anything. I didn't know if anything was real because of the gaslight. I had nothing to pin anything onto, and I was finding in therapy, it was just, I needed something real to put things onto. And just being person-centered, I wasn't getting the validation I needed. The most powerful things I experienced as an ex-cult member in therapy was when we talked about psychoeducation, when also when I was watching documentaries about cults alongside it, but also when the counsellor was self-disclosing as well. That's actually a little bit person-centered, so my mind's gone off on a different track there. I'll come back to that. But yeah, the most powerful stuff I've experienced in therapy is when I was able to talk about the theory in the therapy, to pin this down on. That thing I just said then, let me just add that in. Because I couldn't connect with my emotions, and I've noticed this when I've been counseling clients, when the therapist disclosed their emotions, that was really, really powerful. When they disclosed the emotions they were experiencing while I was talking, because it was so normal to me, the control, that it didn't seem shocking anymore. And then when someone else responded, I found it incredibly powerful. So that was another good thing, alongside the psychoeducation as well. That's a very quick whistle-stop tour there, I apologise, but the key things in summary is psychoeducation plays a huge part in that, and got to remember to be building people's identity up. And for the first generation members, you need the old identity to help them understand the cult experience. And if you go back into childhood, that it could make things worse for them. And also on that note as well, what's very common as well, and from speaking to ex-cult members, people keep trying, the ones who have gone to see psychologists, the people have tried to diagnose them with like bipolar or some other form of personality disorder, or some form of personality disorder, or borderline, or and it's just because of the damage the cult stuff has done. And they've tried to explain to them, I've not got this problem. The cult has done this to my mind, but I've not got this. I just need help unpacking this cult stuff. So that's another thing that people have struggled with as well. Very finally, I'll leave you with this. This is the theory that I work from. This is Gilly Jenkinson's 4-stage recovery model. So this is based on her research, and this has informed how I approach this. So the phase one is almost like realizing that the person has been in a cult, unmasking it, seeing it for what it is. And the cognitive understanding is phase two. So that's understanding the theory, the mind control theory, the thought reform theory. What is a cult? What's a cult leader? What are the characteristics of a cult, and how do they operate before healing the emotional trauma? Because if you go to the emotional trauma first, it's very difficult because you've got nothing to pin it on, and you're still struggling with all the shame and guilt, and the person still thinks it's them. And then if they do the phase before, they realize it's the cult, it's not them. And then you've got the post-traumatic growth for phase 4. She's written an article about that. It was in the BACP magazine, but I think her PhD is in public domain as well on her website if you want to read about that. Is that it? Oh, and there's some books there on cult recovery. So the Clinician's Guide was published by the International Cultic Studies Association, and it's quite expensive, that, and I think you can only get it from America, but that is for counsellors working with ex-cult members. Terror, Love and Brainwashing is excellent, and that's and Escaping Utopia are both on Audible. But Escaping Utopia is specifically about people born into cults. Alex's book is about attachment theory and cults. It's very theory based, and that's excellent. The one on the left is Robert Cialdini's book about the psychology of persuasion. Now, that's from a marketing business kind of background, but he talks about cults in it, and all of those principles are most definitely in cult groups. And so sometimes I teach clients about how people get persuaded as well. And it does overlap with advertising. I talk about, oh, you see this advert, and I can help them see how they help them see it in adverts, and they can think about how they've seen it in their cult. And then that's the classic Cults in Our Midst. It's kind of just a good overview book, and is easy to read as well. Oh, 1 hour and 2 minutes. Right, I can't.
Okay, time for questions.
Right, before we question, can I just nip the loo?
Anyone wants to take a 2-minute break, and then we'll come back and Richard will do any questions.
I'll be with you in a second.
Who's coming for supervision this week? Oh, nice, Ingrid. Doing a different day, doing a Thursday this week.
I'm going to double check I've got admin time. If I have, I'll be joining as well. But I haven't committed to it yet. I'll send Chris a message tomorrow when I finish work.
Fab. Nice one, Dan. Thanks, Nikki. I'll pass that on to Richard for you.
Thank you.
I can't come because I'm working. I'm really sorry. Otherwise I would have done, but I'm at work.
You gutted, Victoria. Love supervision.
I do. It's done good, but I'm working on a Thursday afternoon now. Sorry.
Oh.
Okay, here he is.
Right, there you go. I can't believe I got that into 2 hours. I was thinking I've done way too much there.
Okay, so if anyone's got any questions, you can just use the little hand and Richard will come to you.
Yeah. Some people left.
I'll go, Richard. I've actually seen the NXIVM documentary, and I found it like really, really interesting. And it's, with regards to kind of like the mum and the daughter kind of going, something for them both to get involved in. Yeah. And then obviously like the daughter kind of carrying on in that journey, kind of going on the research trips, making it sound like this loads of good fun, kind of working her way up. And it was easy to see that transition of when you get nearer that core, when you get nearer to kind of that center, that's when you start getting kind of more involved in everything that's kind of going on.
Yeah, and less and less close to reality as well.
Yes.
And mixing with other people less and less.
Yeah.
Yeah. And was it the Seduced one you watched, or The Vow?
Seduced.
Yeah. My friend was in that documentary.
Really?
Some of the things he said in that was about yeah. But the part of the problem is it becomes normal. So the ones in the centre, they think it becomes completely normal, and they get anaesthetised to a lot of it. And it's only when they come out and they tell people what's happened, what they get. Unfortunately, they also get anaesthetised to their own emotions. So when someone's shocked by it, it can be quite healing for them as well, which is why I still share stuff as well.
Yeah, no, thank you for today. I've really enjoyed it.
It was really rushed on. I feel like I've just hit you with a hammer of talking. Anybody else? Oh, Diane?
Olivia?
Yeah.
Sorry, go on.
Okay. Yeah, I also wanted to mention that you can also get something called micro cults, where it's a member that has left an influential group or a cult, and they have basically taken one person hostage and brainwashed them completely. And this it happened. I mean, a lot of people may say, "Oh, well, that's domestic violence." And there is some of that in there, but when the brainwashing is there as well, you know, like for instance, for me, I mentioned that I was scared of dogs, so there would be dog barking constantly to freak me out. And you know, and sometimes I made comments that I didn't really like the police, and so there was this whole thing about the police are going to kill you. And so, you know, this was London, so of course the police are in more places than in the country, and so going into a normal life again is just really awful.
Yeah, and you're right there, because I mean it's not like a black and white. It's either a cult or it isn't. When that term kind of, it can be a two-person cult, it can be a family cult, it can be a cult-like environment in a workplace. This very similar psychological process is going on. I think that's probably why there's an argument from if we should use that term cult or not, because as soon as you use that term, it almost confines something. And I think, but you're right, you can have, most definitely have two-person cults, and you can have domestic abuse and modern slavery going on within a cult, and there's so much overlap. And actually the term brainwashing does come up actually in some domestic abuse textbooks as well.
Yeah.
But and I think that's why it's difficult sometimes, because I think as soon as you use that term cult, I think it's got connotations of something wacky and something a bit out there, or it's this thing that doesn't really happen, or it's rare. But the reality is, if someone's been in an abusive relationship, they've been in a very cult-like environment. So, and like you say, it can happen. It's like fluid, isn't it? It's not, oh, it's this or this. It overspills everywhere, and it can happen in different contexts, definitely. And people do leave and then just start new cults, or they just take people with them, and even counsellors, once you start breaking boundaries, they can start cults and therapy groups and all sorts. And I heard stories of counsellors having people come and move in and live with them, and for specialist therapy, and because as soon as the boundaries, you know, start getting crossed, it's bad. Thanks, Olivia. Sorry, Diane, did you want to ask?
Yeah, there was. My daughter's just coming out of a domestic violent relationship, thank goodness. And there's something about the coercive relationships and sort of making me thinking about that in a way that you described as being sort of from a cult. And it's made me think about, is it a way of being that a group of people have developed, which could be out of something like slavery? And I'm saying that because my daughter's partner is from Jamaica. So I'm just trying to sort of understand their behaviour and what they believe, and it's how they present is so irrational sometimes. How they twist things around, and that actually is a part of the coercive relationship that happens for them to, you know, believe things like. I'll give you an example. That my daughter wasn't to have the antivirus COVID injection because it's a conspiracy, and it's a conspiracy against Black people, and it's that sort of thing that's made me sort of think, well, yeah, I can see that it's a type of cult. And I don't know if I'm explaining myself properly, but I've connected something.
Well, I mean, lots of this stuff everything's on a spectrum, and it's hard to really assess a situation
Yeah.
with limited knowledge.
But that's why I'm thinking it's a way of being that families have learnt to be, rather than it be purposely vindictive. It's about controlling something to keep something safe for them.
Right, yeah. So, I mean,
I think that's my point as well.
If you talk a cult-like group, often people in it think they're doing the right thing.
Yeah.
They don't think they're being malicious. They think genuine, and some of them genuinely think that if a person leaves, they will be in danger, or they think that they're going to be lost, or they're going to hell, or whatever. So generally, people don't think it, but actually, what's really happening is it's coming from somebody, and usually a leader, who's very insecure and narcissistic, and they've groomed all of these people to think like this, to get all of their own needs met. But you know, there are in these ways of thinking that there are a lot of, you know, there are people who are, they just don't know any different, or there are people who aren't bad, they're just doing what they have been groomed.
And it seems to be the whole family join in with this game playing about, you know, we're going to get Auntie so-and-so to sort you out. And the idea of some of the things that they present, it's just so bizarre sometimes to the rational mind. But I'm going to have to leave you because my father's, and thank you for speaking. It's very interesting. It's really helped me think a bit more about working with people with domestic violence, especially. But my father's in hospital. He's having a heart valve replaced, and we haven't heard from them. And my stepmother's getting worried, so I need to ring her.
It's okay, no problem.
But thank you so much, and bye-bye, everybody.
Yeah, take care.
And thank you for putting on the training, Chris.
Joe.
Joe.
I'm just using Chris's login.
Joe. And yes, I'm hoping to join supervision. I haven't sent a link yet because I'm not sure if I'm going to be available. I'd like to.
Hopefully see you Thursday then, Diane. Bye.
Thank you so much.
Yeah.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Ingrid, did you have your hand up as well?
Yes, I just wanted to.
And then Joanna will come to you next. Okay.
Richard, what really stood out for me was when you talked about, you know, the giving of money and giving right to the end when the fear came up, when there was no more money to give almost.
Yeah. Because
I really think at that point you're crossing over a huge barrier to something different. It just sounded like that was kind of a really monumental time when you then somehow really belong to the group.
Yeah, I mean, the money thing is they basically take they're teaching you to ignore your gut feelings, basically. So because they say, well, it's faith. God will provide you money. You know, it's reckless. It's like, just give and give and give, and they tell all these stories. And this is mystical manipulation, by the way, from Lifton's model. They'll tell you a story about how they gave all the money in the bank account, and then the miracle next day, someone gave them a check for £1,000. And but what's really going on, because this is how they distort the truth, so a family member will have panicked and bailed them out. So then they'll stand up at the front and tell everyone how, you know, this money came out of nowhere. God provided the money, but really what's happening is just being bailed out by people who care about them. And so that what happens in your head, then you think, oh yeah, God will give me the money. And you basically, it got to a point in my head where I shut my mind down completely. I would just give the £100 without even batting an eyelid. I wouldn't even think about it. And it just becomes really reckless. And they do lots of things like so my group, they take weekly offerings, and then twice a year they used to have big offerings where they'd publish literature saying this person's giving £10,000, this person's giving £8,000, to normalise giving huge amounts of money. They'd release professionally produced trailers for the event. This year, the Dream offering, loaded language, Dream, if you remember from what I said before, emotional language. So they'd label the offerings with a loaded language. They advertised it as a big event, so you had to be there. You can't miss Dream Offering Sunday. So you're already giving every week, and then you come to this other event and they've built it up, and then you give even more, and they get you to the place where you're just completely reckless with it. People will give £50,000, £40,000, but there was no financial accountability. The leaders were traveling all over the world like celebrities, taking what they call love offerings when they go to visit different churches. So then they pocket the money from that. The pastor was on £100,000 for the group I was in, and basically just living in luxury while you can't even get through the month. So what they were doing as well, they pay me a really low wage. So I was on 13.5 grand a year. And they would then just take the money back off me in the offerings. So they were getting funding for the work they were doing. They were taking money from the funding, basically stealing it, paying me a low wage and getting me to give them money back as well. But you think you're part of something that's changing the world, so of course you would give, because you think it really matters. When you're in it, you genuinely think it matters. It's only afterwards when you come out and you start having these strange thoughts about money, and you think money's going to fall out of the sky, and you can't grasp what you're supposed to be. It just messes with your head completely. So you're left with that foggy belief that money is just going to materialize from somewhere, and it doesn't. And then you have to relearn everything, and you have to then go, I have to learn all this, and I can't be reckless. And yeah, it's a strange thing, really. Yeah.
I just wonder, I mean, I know time to recover can take, long time, short time. But what is the average kind of recovery time that with people that you have worked with?
Never. It just gets easier.
Yeah.
And just gets easier and gets easier. But I don't think you're ever really fully. Well, it's like lots of things. You never really fully. I don't think you ever really fully get over something. But things just get easier. They just get easier over time. But the common thing, see, people did things that were really unhelpful. Like when I went to see the GP, I saw this nurse who was covering, I can't remember, but he was telling me, you need to go and get a job. You need to get back into work. You can't just live. And he had a go at me, and then like, I just don't think people realised how ill I was. And I've known other ex-cult members who they said, I need to talk about the cult experience, and the counsellor wouldn't let them and kept taking them to other places. And people ring me up and they say, I can't find a counsellor who even understands what's happened to me, and things get in the way. Lots of things get in the way. But yeah, it just takes a long time. And most of the damage was done to me in 6 months. And now, where are we? 4 years later, I'm on my 5th counsellor now, and most of it was done in 6 months, the damage. And I'm counselling people now who grew up in it, spent 20 years, 30 years. But yeah, it's just finding the right support, really. It can go quick. It can go fairly quick. I think the worst stuff in the early stages with knowing how to recover. Yeah.
And have you been threatened by cult members or clients that you've?
No, well, my own cult, no, because they had a bit of a passive aggressive approach. I was like, we're above all this. We're above anyone complaining about us. They've removed comments online. They've been on the news, they've been on Channel 4 News and BBC News in the last couple of years. And when everyone comments on the line, they get them all the posts removed. They whitewashed everything. The investigation they've done into certain things was a total con. And basically they passive aggressive. They wouldn't put anything in writing. They'd never give you anything you could use on them. So fortunately, my cult wasn't aggressive. It was very passive aggressive. It was very clever. So, but other groups, it's quite common for my clients to be harassed. So that's quite common. And no one's ever done anything to me yet so far. It's only been 2 years. But I don't even know how likely it is. I know people who have been sued for speaking out again about groups, but I'm a little bit careful sometimes. And I've been warned that I should tell the college I work at what I'm doing in case anyone maliciously does anything to me. But I'm still not sure how real the threat is. And I don't know if I'm either being, I have days where I think I'm being overcautious and paranoid, and I have other days where I think, I'm, you know, or am I being naive? So I don't know. No one's come after me yet. But some of them have got a lot of money, you know, so you just don't know. So, yeah.
Thanks.
And just to add to that, when some of the feedback that I've had when I've been working with clients is occasional silent phone calls with no number. But that's about it. Yeah. And length of therapy, it's going to take more than 6 to 10 weeks. And I know the NHS is quite keen to do short-term therapy for everything, but actually if you've left a cult situation either because you were brought up in one or later, then you need longer times in therapy. But that also means that you need to have enough stability to get a job or find a counsellor that will work for lower fees, which is kind of tough at times.
Yeah, you could for some people, they're probably going to be in therapy for most of their life. The ones who grew up in it probably will be in and out of it. I tend to find as well it works better in blocks rather than just long continuous stints. Mm. So when I'm counselling people, I often say, you know, we don't have to see each other. We can have gaps and test it out, and you go and live your life for a bit, and in a few months you can come back. I tend to find that therapy in blocks works better, but yeah, and some of my clients will go and get, because of other abusive experience, they might go and see a therapist who's specialist in childhood sexual abuse and things like that, and then they'll see me, and then they'll see a different therapist, and but yeah, and we when I'm speaking to clients, we talk about all that stuff, like what do you need, what's going to be useful for you, and you just, yeah, I don't think there's a set time on anything really, but yeah.
Okay. Rana?
Yeah, I thought it was really interesting what you said about I think the gut feeling kind of being lost, and I think yeah, I was thinking about how it must make it very difficult for clients to feel confident in their own decisions following experiences like that, actually to feel that, to trust in themselves really. But there's a couple of things I was just kind of curious about, which is one was I was thinking about the people who sort of start these cult organizations and the motivations. I'm trying to work out, is it almost like a plan manipulation, or is it unconscious on their part as well to some extent, or do they believe they're, I was gonna say shit, but for want of a better word, like and also the other thing I was thinking about is, especially if a lot of these come from a sort of religious or a background or a belief in God, let's say, is it quite tricky then for people who, let's say, had that before joining a cult, had that belief, and then to kind of figure out what parts to still accept and which parts to let go of following it? Yeah.
Yeah. So what was the first bit of the question again? Sorry, it was the. Sorry,
it's just about the people who, like, where it sort of starts from, really. The people's kind of, is it an unconscious? Is it like people that actually believe what they're doing, or do you think it is a more? I think you used the word narcissistic before, kind of behavior going on. Do you think?
I think there's a few things going on. My cult leader was sacked. He was kicked out. Basically, the trustees turned on him and booted him out, basically. And he's just gone and started another one in another country. The exact same setup, the exact same, and they will probably do the same thing. And speaking to many other ex-members of my group, he couldn't take any criticism, got really defensive and angry, and wouldn't accept any criticism whatsoever, and is mind-blowingly arrogant. So thinks he deserves it, and thinks that it's everybody else who's got the problems. So lots of the teachings about everybody else's fear and the weaknesses, and in his point of view, I don't think he sees it. I actually don't think he realizes what he's doing. But I do think he's probably a sociopath as well. So he doesn't even, I'm not sure how aware he is. I read his book, and he really is teaching about how to manipulate people, but I'm thinking, does he understand that's manipulation? I don't think he does. I don't think he sees what he's doing entirely. So I think also some groups start off fairly okay, but as they get more isolated, as the person in charge gets more power, their weaknesses are amplified, I think, and they don't see it because they're actually still cut off from the world, and they push anyone who outwardly challenges them because they don't like to be criticised, and keep the ones who they can control or who are reinforcing what they want. So I think sometimes it evolves into something really toxic, but again, I'm not sure how often they realise. However, there are some people who are just con artists, and they know exactly what they're doing because they can get a lot of money and power, and they know. And I think it's one of those things where, or there's a mix of two. Certain areas they know what they're doing, certain areas they're oblivious. So
yeah,
I think it's quite complex. I don't think it's one of those things where there's a clear-cut answer.
Yeah, no, I wasn't necessarily thinking there would be, but just want to hear your insight on it. It's interesting, yeah.
Yeah, and just to comment as well, you mentioned the religious. There are counselling therapy cults. There are multi-level marketing cults, New Age. So about 50% of the calls I get are Bible-based cults. The other 50% are a mixture. Sorry, I'm trying to put percentages on things off the top of my head. So I got quite a few calls about QAnon. Online motivational speakers on YouTube is quite a common one. Self-proclaimed gurus who are talking about mental health on YouTube, and the people sign up for the courses and they're paying ridiculous amounts of money, and before you know it, they're not seeing their friends anymore because it's supposed to convince them that the friends are holding them back, and it's all been done through YouTube and then electronic, internet. So that's quite a common one. Or they've enrolled in some kind of they've got involved in some kind of meditation thing, and there's been some kind of New Age guru who've been grooming them, but 50% of them is Bible based, more or less, the ones I get. The second question, what was the second question?
Yeah, so sorry, it was more just, is it difficult then for someone, let's say before joining a cult, let's say they're part of a church organization already, and that's something that's quite an important part of their identity, and then they join something that sort of describes themselves as being that to some extent, but obviously isn't. Is it then quite difficult for them to distinguish which parts are cult identity and which parts are their true identity?
So what happens is, so a certain person had a faith, and then he ended up in a cult that's distorted that faith. So cults will change the meanings of words. So one word before has changed its meaning. So sometimes the person needs to really think about what that meant in the cult and what that meant beforehand. So for example, the word giving, before I was in the cult, giving means helping people and volunteering. When you're in the cult, giving means money, and the terminology shifts, the definition, and your understanding shifts because of the cult. So trying to change that word back to what it was is quite a big thing. But people often have a faith of some kind who I counsel, and the cult has wrecked it and distorted it. And part of the therapy has been, what do they really think? What them reclaiming it again and going. But also often it changes from what it was before, because they start noticing unhealthy things in their faith before they even got into the cult, so that then they'll start realizing, oh, I thought that before, that wasn't very healthy, and they almost create their own new faith, what they want from it, and it becomes healthier than often it was before they even went in. But the problem is, as well, is intertwined with this, is they often, ex-cult members have a lot of magical, superstitious thinking. They're looking for signs all the time, and it can be really, it's like it's a rabbit hole. It doesn't stop. Everything's a sign, everything's a warning, and trying to be with them while they process some of them ones. It's actually they're lost in it. They can't get out of it. They're like, and I saw this happen, and that meant God was this, and then this happened, and then this, and I was walking down the street, and a bird flew past, and that meant, and they really will get absolutely entangled in that. So that's often going on as well, and actually unraveling that stuff, I have to be careful that I'm not living in that with them. So understanding that as well is one challenging thing. So I often find that if you go back to the identity stuff, that helps settle some of the other stuff as well.
That makes sense. Thank you, by the way. It's been really, really useful. I really enjoyed it.
Thanks. Yeah. I've answered those. I've answered everything.
Yeah, thank you.
Okay, Dan?
Hi. Hi, it's not a question. I just want to say, Richard, I think you're so courageous and everything that you've achieved. And I think it's incredible. Not only have you been through your own trauma, your own story, you're helping other people, and what you've achieved with your qualifications and what you're doing now, I think is absolutely amazing. I think it's great that you can be a voice for victims of people in cults, and you can help people, and not just that, but you're helping us as counsellors to be able to help anybody that's been through that. So I just want to say thank you, because it's been absolutely incredible listening to you, and we have no idea what people go through, and I think it's really, really good, solid advice that you've given us as counsellors, how to approach it, how not to approach it. So I just want to say thank you.
Thank you. Thanks, Danielle.
Any more questions? Okay. Richard, anything else you want to say before we go?
Yeah, I don't think so. Other than, I mean, I feel like I've only just scratched the surface there. I mean, there's so much more about the psychology of persuasion and how cults, cognitive dissonance and narcissism and social, psychopathic personalities and childhood, and there is so much language and what's happening in your mind, and how certain parts of your brain shut down when you get emotional and you're not critically thinking, and there's so much to talk about. And in a lot of ways I'm editing myself a lot as well, because I don't want to get into any kind of legal trouble, so I've got lots of examples from all of the things I've read, but I've just got to be careful what I say about certain groups, and also try and give you examples but that aren't specific to my clients as well, so I'm not crossing any kind of line. So when I'm trying to give examples, I'm trying to keep them really, really vague, and I'm mixing lots of examples together into one, so it's like a brand new one. And so yeah, but there's one of the best thing to do alongside reading about the psychology stuff is watch all the documentaries on it, because the documentaries are really helpful. Leah Remini, Scientology and the Aftermath. You've got the Jonestown one, which I think might still be on iPlayer, which is absolutely brilliant as well. There's a few that are really helpful. Yeah.
Oh, thanks, Richard. It's been amazing. Thanks so much.
Thank you.
And thanks everyone for coming. It's been good. Okay.
You've got that awkward moment now where no one knows how to end